Under the fiery sunset of Dakar, Senegal, the five-star Le Grand Océan Hotel shimmered like a jewel on the Atlantic coast. The towering glass building reflected vibrant orange light, its large windows opening to a vast seascape where waves gently lapped against white sandy shores. Inside the main lobby, the atmosphere buzzed like a vivid painting of luxury and power. International guests, from European businessmen in tailored suits to African diplomats in vibrant traditional attire, mingled in a lively stream of sophistication. Amid the bustling crowd, a black man in a simple white shirt, slightly worn jeans, and dusty sneakers entered the lobby with a small backpack slung over his shoulder. No one paid him any attention, except for a security guard near the door, who cast a suspicious glance, as if wondering whether this man had wandered into the world of opulence by mistake. That man was Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, fresh from a discreet meeting with West African leaders at a nearby military base. He had come to attend a conference, but, as always, chose to arrive quietly. No fanfare, no entourage, no bodyguards. For Traoré, simplicity was not just a lifestyle, but a statement. A leader must blend with the people, understand them, feel their struggles, rather than stand aloof with the arrogance of power. The hotel lobby was adorned with extravagance. Enormous vases of white orchids on marble tables, sparkling crystal chandeliers casting a soft golden glow from the ceiling. Gentle jazz music floated from a corner where a pianist played soothing melodies. Guests chatted animatedly, some sipping champagne, others reviewing conference documents on tablets. At the reception desk, Julien Dubois, a 30-year-old French employee, was busy checking the VIP guest list. With slick-back blonde hair and a meticulously practiced smile, Julien prided himself on his ability to read people. He believed he could gauge a person's status from their clothing, posture, or even their gaze. For Julien, working at Le Grand Océan was not just about service, but an opportunity to network with the powerful, those who could offer generous tips or career advancements. When Traoré approached the desk, set his backpack on the marble floor, and handed over his identification, Julien looked up, his eyes scanning the man from head to toe. A plain white shirt with no brand, faded jeans, and sneakers caked with red dust. No hint of wealth or influence. Julien frowned, his tone polite but cold. "Excuse me, sir, I need to verify this." Ibrahim, he glanced at Traoré's documents, noting the name and nationality, Burkina Faso, then whispered to a colleague, a Senegalese woman named Awa, standing nearby. "Is this really a VIP? Doesn't look like one," Julien said, his voice tinged with mockery. Awa, with neatly braided hair and a warm smile, glanced at Traoré, sensing something unusual in his demeanor, a calm confidence without arrogance. She shook her head slightly. "I'm not sure, but you should double-check. He seems different." Julien ignored her, tapping at the computer as if serving Traoré was an unwelcome inconvenience. At that moment, the lobby doors swung open, and Hans Weber, the CEO of a German mining conglomerate, strode in with two assistants and a gleaming Louis Vuitton suitcase. Weber, a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, wore a perfectly tailored gray suit that exuded unmistakable authority. The Patek Philippe watch on his wrist glinted under the lights, and his walk, head high, shoulders squared, commanded the room as if the world owed him deference. The crowd in the lobby stirred, some turning to look, others whispering about Weber's reputation in the gold and lithium mining industry. Julien immediately abandoned Traoré, rushing to greet Weber with a beaming smile. "Mr. Weber, what an honor to welcome you," Julien announced loudly, his tone fawning, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "The presidential suite is ready, and we've arranged everything per your request, from Bordeaux wine to private transportation." "Madame," Weber nodded curtly, barely glancing at Julien, signaling his assistant to hand over a credit card. Julien processed the check-in swiftly, casting admiring glances at Weber, while Traoré stood quietly, waiting, his gaze calm but sharp, as if observing a play he'd seen too many times before. Finally, Julien returned to Traoré, handing him a key to a standard room on the 5th floor, one of the hotel's lower levels with smaller rooms and no sea view. "Your room, sir," Julien said brusquely, his tone devoid of enthusiasm. Contact the front desk if you have any issues. Traoré took the key, nodded slightly, and, without a word of complaint, picked up his backpack and headed toward the elevators, blending into the crowd unnoticed. But as he walked away, Awa, still behind the desk, watched him, an odd premonition stirring within her. She whispered to herself, "This man is no ordinary person." She didn't know she had just encountered one of West Africa's most powerful leaders, a man whose humility and dignity would soon command the world's attention. The main conference room at Le Grand Océan was a vast space, its glass walls framing the radiant sunset outside. Large panels displayed charts, maps, and images of gold, copper, and lithium mines across Africa, from Mali to Namibia. European, Asian, and North American investors sat in rows, pens and tablets in hand, ready to note new business opportunities. The air buzzed with excitement but also tension. This was where billion-dollar deals were negotiated, where the future of African nations was shaped, often by those with little understanding of the continent. Traoré, after settling into his room and resting briefly, arrived at the conference in the same unassuming outfit: white shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He chose an inconspicuous seat near a group of young journalists from Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. He didn't introduce himself or wear a name tag, simply sat down, placed his backpack beside him, and listened to the debates. Occasionally, he jotted notes in a small notebook or asked a brief but incisive question that made those around him take notice. Next to Traoré was Fatou Diallo, a 25-year-old freelance journalist from Senegal with natural curly hair and a sharp gaze. Fatou worked for an online outlet focused on African issues, attending the conference to uncover stories deeper than the usual platitudes. Across from her sat Kwame Asante, a Ghanaian journalist known for his critical pieces on the influence of foreign mining companies. Fatou and Kwame were quickly drawn to Traoré's presence, not because he stood out, but because he was so ordinary. He chatted with them warmly, asking about their work, the challenges facing African youth, and sharing his thoughts on education, agriculture, and economic self-reliance. "We don't need others to mine our gold," Traoré said, his voice low but firm. "We need to build factories, train engineers, and keep the gold in Africa." Fatou nodded, impressed by the clarity of his argument. "You sound like a politician," she teased. Traoré merely smiled, saying nothing, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mystery. Meanwhile, at the conference's center, Hans Weber dominated the discussions. Seated at the main table, surrounded by investors, senior officials, and a few international journalists, Weber's booming voice and confident demeanor commanded attention. He bragged loudly about his mining projects in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. "These countries are lucky to have us," he declared, gesturing grandly. "They have resources but no capital, no technology, no vision. Without companies like ours, they'd remain backward forever." Some nodded in agreement, particularly European investors, but several African officials nearby frowned, visibly displeased with Weber's condescending tone. Traoré, from his corner, listened to every word, his expression unchanging. He sipped his water, a faint smile playing on his lips, not one of agreement, but of patience, as if he knew the truth would soon surface. Fatou, seated beside Traoré, noticed his demeanor as Weber spoke. She whispered to Kwame, "There's something special about this man. He's not like the others here." Kwame, typing notes on his phone, chuckled softly. "Maybe a professor or an activist. Definitely not a businessman. He's too simple." Fatou nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was hiding something far greater. She resolved to observe him closely, mentally cataloging every detail like a journalist chasing a lead. The conference's gala dinner took place in a lavish banquet hall, with glittering crystal chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over tables draped in white silk. The menu was exquisite: grilled salmon with passion fruit sauce, imported Wagyu beef, and French desserts crafted like works of art. Soft classical music blended with the murmur of business conversations. Traoré, still in his simple attire, sat at a corner table near a window, where he could see the moonlit ocean sparkling outside. He chatted with Fatou and Kwame, who had become his impromptu allies at the conference. Their conversation was lively but understated, focusing on practical issues: how Africa could break free from foreign aid dependency, ways to educate youth to become future leaders, in the role of media in reshaping perceptions of the continent. We need to tell our own stories, Traoré said, his eyes alight. For too long, the world has heard about Africa through someone else's lens. Anna Fatou nodded, scribbling his words in her notebook, feeling they carried the weight of a manifesto. Meanwhile, Hans Weber at the central table continued to draw attention. Surrounded by investors, senior officials from Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire, and a group of international journalists, Weber held a glass of red wine, loudly recounting his conglomerate's successes. In Burkina Faso, we've turned barren lands into modern gold mines, he boasted, his tone smug. The locals thank us every day. They need us for jobs, for a future. A Senegalese official, Mr. Mbaye, seated nearby, frowned slightly but said nothing. Mbaye knew that projects like Weber's often reaped massive profits for foreign companies, while locals received low-wage jobs in devastated environments. But he held his silence, unwilling to disrupt the gala's ambiance. Julien, now overseeing the banquet area, passed by Traoré's table and noticed him seated in what he deemed the wrong spot. He paused, observed Traoré for a moment, then turned to Awa, who was serving drinks nearby. "Is this guy even an invited guest?" Julien whispered, his tone laced with irritation. "Why is he at this table? It's reserved for senior journalists and officials." Awa glanced at Traoré, sensing the calm assurance in his conversation with Fatou and Kwame. She shook her head. "I don't think he's ordinary, Julien. You should be careful." But Julien dismissed her, instructing Awa to check the guest list again. Reluctantly, Awa approached Traoré's table, offering an apologetic smile. "Excuse me, sir. May I have your name? Just for verification." Traoré looked at her, his eyes warm and devoid of annoyance. "Ibrahim, from Burkina Faso." Awa nodded, relieved by his kindness. But when she reported back, Julien frowned. "Burkina Faso? No one important from there is here," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Must be a mistake. I'll handle it." Julien decided to take action. He approached Traoré's table, his smile polite but forced. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a mix-up with the seating. This table is for special guests. Could you move to the other area?" Traoré looked up, meeting Julien's eyes directly. His gaze wasn't angry, but it carried a quiet strength that made Julien flinch. "I'm fine here," Traoré said, his voice low but firm, "unless you have a specific reason for asking me to move." Julien was stunned, unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he assumed held no status. He tried to maintain his smile, but his voice grew tense. "Sir, it's conference protocol. We need to ensure everyone is in their proper place." Traoré tilted his head, his expression still calm. "Then show me the protocol. Who decides the seating here?" Julien was unprepared for the question. He stammered, glancing around for support. But no one paid him attention except Fatou and Kwame, who watched with growing curiosity. Fatou, sensing the tension, gently squeezed Kwame's hand under the table, whispering, "Something's about to happen. He's not ordinary." Kwame nodded, his eyes fixed on Traoré, trying to guess who this man might be. Hans Weber from the main table noticed the commotion. He laughed loudly, calling out, "This guy probably doesn't understand conference rules. Let me explain." Weber stood, striding toward Traoré's table, wine glass in hand, his smug expression suggesting he was about to school an inferior. He stopped in front of the table, looking down at Traoré, and spoke in a condescending tone. "Listen, friend, this is an important event. If you're not a key guest, it's best to follow instructions. Don't make trouble." Traoré met Weber's gaze, unflinching, a sharp glint in his eyes that made Weber falter, though he tried to hide it. "Trouble?" Traoré repeated, his voice calm. "I'm just having dinner. If anyone's causing trouble, it's not me." The atmosphere in the room began to shift. A few nearby guests stopped talking, turning to watch. Mr. Mbaye, the Senegalese official, frowned, sensing something amiss. Fatou, with a journalist's instinct, discreetly pulled out her phone, activating the recorder, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Kwame whispered to her, "Let's see how this plays out. I bet this guy's going to make them regret this." Julien, now feeling the pressure of Traoré's gaze and the growing attention from the crowd, tried to regain composure. He turned to Weber, speaking softly. "Mr. Weber, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll sort this out." Weber nodded, smirking. "Good. Don't let nonsense like this ruin the gala's vibe. At that moment, the banquet hall doors swung open, and a group of high-ranking Burkina Faso officials in crisp military uniforms entered, accompanied by an honor guard. The room fell silent, as if someone had hit a pause button. All eyes turned to them. The leader, a tall officer wearing a black beret and gleaming military insignia, strode directly to Traoré's table and saluted with utmost respect. "Mr. President," he said, his voice ringing in the hushed room, "we're here to escort you. Apologies for our delay." The hall seemed to hold its breath. Julien froze, his hand trembling, dropping his pen, the metallic clink against the marble floor echoing in the silence. Hans Weber, standing near Traoré's table, paled, his wine glass shaking slightly, red liquid spilling over the rim. "President," he muttered, his voice faltering, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Traoré stood, smoothing his white shirt, and nodded to the officer. "It's fine," he said, his tone as calm as ever, as if this were just another moment in an ordinary day. "I was enjoying the evening." He glanced around, his eyes pausing briefly on Julien, then Weber, not with anger, but with a quiet intensity that pierced them both. Fatou and Kwame exchanged wide-eyed looks. Fatou whispered, "I knew it! That's President Traoré." Kwame, still trying to stay composed, muttered, "Good Lord, we've been chatting with the president for 2 hours." The crowd began to murmur. Cameras flashed, and journalists scrambled to take notes. Some discreetly pulled out phones recording, knowing this moment would make history. Mr. Mbai, the Senegalese official, rose from his table, approached Traoré, and bowed respectfully. "Mr. President, it's an honor to have you here," he said, his voice sincere. "If there's been any inconvenience, please allow us to make it right." Traoré smiled, shaking Mbai's hand. "No worries," he said. "I came to listen and learn, like everyone else." But his eyes, though warm, carried a strength that told Mbaye he'd seen everything, from Julien's disrespect to Weber's arrogance. Weber, now trying to slip back into the crowd, was stopped by another Senegalese official, Miss Aissatou Diop, who had overheard his earlier remarks. She approached, her voice icy. "Mr. Weber, we need to discuss your comments tonight. Your statements about Burkina Faso and Africa are unacceptable." Weber stammered, attempting to justify himself. I was just talking business. I meant no offense." But Ms. Diop cut him off. "You'll have a chance to explain, but not here. And you, Julien?" She turned to Julien, trembling in a corner. "The hotel will need to explain its treatment of a head of state." Julien, pale as a ghost, stammered, I didn't know he was a president. I just thought he didn't look." His voice trailed off, met with no sympathy from the room. Awa, standing in a corner, beamed with pride, her intuition validated. She looked at Traoré, now shaking hands with Mbaye and other officials, and thought, "This is why Africa is changing. Because of men like him." Fatou, ever the journalist, had recorded the entire exchange, from Julien's request for Traoré to move to the honor guard's arrival. She sent the audio to her newsroom with a message. "This story will change everything." Traoré left the banquet hall, greeted by a crowd in the corridor outside, hotel staff, locals, and journalists who had heard of his presence. They lined up, clapping as he passed. He paused, shaking hands with some, exchanging brief words in French and a few in Wolof, Senegal's local language. A young boy, the son of a hotel worker, ran up, offering Traoré a bracelet made of seashells. Traoré smiled, slipping it onto his wrist, and said, "Thank you. This is the most precious gift of the night." The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, capturing a powerful yet approachable leader who wasn't above speaking to a child. As journalists swarmed, Traoré offered brief remarks. "Africa doesn't need anyone to teach us how to live. We just need to respect each other as humans. I came to listen, to learn, and to remind everyone that our future is in our own hands." His words were recorded, spreading through articles and broadcasts, becoming a powerful message of dignity and national pride. International outlets began covering the story, with headlines like, "Burkina Faso's President, the humble man who made the world reflect," and "Ibrahim Traoré's Simplicity, a lesson for a new era." The story echoed on TV, in cafes, and in schools, becoming a symbol of African unity and self-respect. Back in the banquet hall, the atmosphere remained unsettled. Julien was summoned to the hotel manager's office that night. Madame Ndiaye, a sharp Senegalese woman with silver hair and a high bun, fixed him with a stern gaze. "You insulted a head of state, and worse, you judged a man by his appearance," she said, her voice like steel. "This hotel is built on respect, and you undermined that." Julien bowed his head, trying to explain. "I didn't know he was a president. I just thought he didn't look." Madame Ndiaye cut him off. "You don't need to know who he is. You just need to treat everyone equally. That's your job." Julien was suspended indefinitely, and the hotel issued a public apology for the incident. But the apology couldn't quell the media storm that followed. Hans Weber faced a larger scandal. His condescending remarks about Burkina Faso and Africa, recorded by Fatou, were sent to major newsrooms. Articles quickly emerged, detailing Weber's arrogance alongside analyses of the impact of foreign mining companies on Africa. His conglomerate's stock plummeted, and African partners, including Senegal's government, began canceling contracts. Weber tried contacting the German embassy for intervention, but Burkina Faso issued a clear statement. "We welcome investment, but not disrespect. Those who belittle Africa have no place here." Weber was asked to leave Senegal within 24 hours, and his projects in Burkina Faso were suspended indefinitely. An article by a journalist present at the conference called the event, "The Moment Africa Declared, It's Time the World Learned to Respect Us." In the days that followed, Traoré's story at Grand Océan became a global phenomenon. Major outlets worldwide published articles with headlines like, "Burkina Faso's President, the humble man who made the world reflect," and "Ibrahim Traoré's Simplicity, a lesson for a new era." TV and radio broadcasts reached millions, from cities to remote villages. In Africa, the story inspired youth, who organized discussions, wrote articles, and composed music to honor Traoré. A song by a Nigerian artist inspired by the event topped charts, its chorus proclaiming, "Don't judge by looks, for Africa is rising." Sung at gatherings, schools, and street performances, it became an anthem of pride and unity. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré resumed his work, meeting community leaders, advancing education projects, and strengthening the military to protect borders. He didn't mention the Dakar incident, didn't boast, didn't use it to polish his image. For him, it was just another day, a chance to remind the world that dignity lies not in clothing or status, but in how one treats others. Yet the story, like a wildfire, spread across Africa and beyond, inspiring millions about self-respect, justice, and the power of humility. The next day at Grand Océan, Awa was promoted to customer service supervisor, a reward for her intuition and respect toward Traoré. Standing in the lobby, watching new guests arrive, she vowed, "Every person who walks through these doors has a story. I'll never judge them by appearances." In a small Paris apartment, Julien, now jobless, scrolled through articles about Traoré. He shook his head, whispering, "I was wrong." The lesson, though late, would stay with him forever. Fatou, back at her Dakar newsroom, wrote a long feature titled, "Ibrahim Traoré, the man who changed how we see each other." Translated into dozens of languages, it became a reference in journalism schools worldwide. Kwame launched a media campaign, urging young journalists to tell stories of African resilience and dignity. The campaign drew thousands of participants from Nairobi to Lagos, Accra to Johannesburg. The story of Ibrahim Traoré in Dakar was more than an event. It was a symbol. It reminded a world full of prejudice and injustice that people like Traoré, humble, resolute, unbowed, are the flames lighting the path to a better future. That flame, sparked in a Senegalese hotel, burned brightly across Africa and beyond. A timeless reminder. Dignity needs no fanfare, for it shines through its own strength.